Hitler invading Czechoslovakia. In March 1939, Britain and France largely abandoned their policy of trying to appease Hitler in favor of policy of deterrence. That policy of appeasing Hitler was called, obviously, appeasement, and it didn't work eventually. So the reason for this major change in direction was actually what happened in Czechoslovakia after the episode of conquering and annexing Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia was a multinational state formed immediately after World War I, and it was inhabited by many different ethnicities and nationalities, such as Czechs, Slovaks, Magyars, Slavs, and Ruthens, as well as other nationalities. Once the Sudetenland was transferred to Germany, the rest of the state began to break up, and this is in part because Slovaks wanted to gain their independence. Czechoslovakia remained a country which was rich in agriculture and industry, and these were resources that Hitler very much wanted to obtain for the benefit of Germany, especially in the perspective of the World War I, which was knocking on the door. He finally made his strike in March 1939. President Hacha of Czechoslovakia was bullied into placing the fortunes of his country in the hands of the German Reich, and the German army occupied Prague on 15th of March 1939. These events are quite complicated but important for what they reveal about Hitler's true intentions, and we look now especially into Hitler's foreign policy targets. Up until and including the Munich Agreement, every territorial change sought by Hitler could be justified on the grounds of self-determination, allowing land mainly populated by Germans to transfer to the German Reich back to the fatherland, such as the example of Sudetenland. The events of March 1939 actually were different. Here Hitler was taking new territory simply in order to increase the power of Germany. And Germany had no more right to Czechoslovakia than it did to, let's say, Belgium or Luxembourg. There were no Germans living in the newly acquired territories, and Hitler was clearly straying well beyond the acceptable principles of achieving his greater Germany, one of his main focus in his foreign policy. He was now making a bid to dominate Europe by force. We're going to start today with Hitler's sixth move in the road to war, and that's Czechoslovakia. Obviously, we discussed a lot about the annexation of Sudetenland, and we know that Sudetenland was part of Germany before. It was inhabited by heaps of German people, German-speaking people, and really, in some respects, more nationalistic, if I can say so, than the Germans living in Germany, with a huge, strong desire to go back to fatherland, okay, to Germany. So this was a big bonus for Hitler, obviously, and this was a matter of, treating Hitler with a little bit of understanding, following, obviously, the policy of appeasement from Britain and France point of view. Eastern Europe was I would like to say that it was kind of under siege. Why? Think of something, Czechoslovakia will begin to fall apart. Of course, Czechoslovakia was kind of an artificial state created after World War I, a successor state, as they call it. Czechoslovakia was not in the position to defend herself, so it was really a weak country militarily, and not a very disciplined army, and really not too many resources and not too much of history, not too much of discipline in terms of army, and that will be important for an army. And the Sudetenland area had been her only defendable border, really. So it was a kind of like a doomed country, obviously. And if Hitler, with his power and his kind of like very prepared troops and desire to expand to the east as a result of Lebensraum, one of his foreign policies, as if Hitler will actually eye on Czechoslovakia, then the country was doomed. Not to mention that the other small or not so small countries from Eastern Europe and Central Europe, respectively Hungary and Poland, they will just look towards Czechoslovakia and they will just start wanting some bits and pieces from the Czechoslovakian territory. And so in March 1939, the Germans marched in and took over the rest of Czechoslovakia. We'll see a little bit more details in the presentation. This part with Czechoslovakia was agreed at the Munich Conference in a very, very large understanding of the policy of appeasement. It was a big problem after, so they agreed at Munich Conference to siege Sudetenland to Germany, just because that area was inhabited by German people, just because heaps of people in France and Britain believed that Germany was punished too severely, harsh, in the Treaty of Versailles. So they said, yeah, that's okay, take Sudetenland. But with Czechoslovakia, they started to see the true face of Hitler. Then Britain and France changed their tactics and began to take a stronger line with Germany. It is a way of saying it because they didn't have the options to take a stronger line to Germany. They were not really ready for the war, though in the latest years they accelerated the rearming programs. And the big problem for them was that Hitler now started to threaten Poland. So Britain and France began to speed up their rearmament programs and promised to defend Poland if she was attacked. We know now that Poland was attacked, and Poland ceased to exist after Hitler and Stalin split it up in two. And so again, empty promises from Britain and France. Of course, they declared war, but it was just a declaration. That reminds me more of the inefficiency of the League of Nations, who, after big problems created by Italy and Japan in Abyssinia and Manchuria, they condemned and they, kind of morally condemned these countries. And these countries, they didn't give a toss about these condemnations. So they just walked out. So does this mean that appeasement has been a mistake? And that's a very valid question, and you can kind of discuss this. We're going to do some more activities on that. Of course, a good historian, a good student will look into both sides. It was a mistake. It was not a mistake. It bought some time. Anyway, historians will have different views over this. Let's watch this one, which is another small 3 minutes video to see how the German aggression started on Czechoslovakia. And this is about, this is from the Holocaust point of view.
The curtain fell on Act I, but already the Nazi conspirators prepared for Act II, with this 1938 memorandum from Hitler to his high command. It is my unalterable decision to smash Czechoslovakia by military force in the near future. It is the job of the political leaders to choose the politically and militarily suitable moment. Konrad Henlein was the local Nazi political leader. The plan was labeled Operation Green. Defendant Jodl recorded in his diary, "Operation Green will be launched by means of an incident in Czechoslovakia that will provoke the need for German military intervention. Determining the exact day and hour of this incident is of the utmost importance." A few months later, Germany signed the Munich Pact with England, France, and Italy. This pact involved the transfer of the Sudetenland to Germany. The conspirators called it their last territorial demand. But before the ink was dry, they were making other plans, for Hitler's goal was the complete absorption of Czechoslovakia. And now the Czech president, Emil Hacha, was called to a meeting with Hitler and defendants Göring, von Ribbentrop, and Keitel. They gave Hacha an ultimatum. Bohemia and Moravia would be ceded to Germany immediately, or Czechoslovakia would be invaded and Prague destroyed from the air. Hacha was helpless. Defendants von Ribbentrop and Frick signed the decree making Bohemia and Moravia a German protectorate. Speaking some months earlier about the Sudetenland, Hitler had said, "I have given assurances and reiterate them now that Germany has no more territorial problems in Europe. I am no longer interested in the Czech state. I guarantee it." September 26, 1938, Adolf Hitler. Now, according to more of his adjutant's notes, Hitler reviewed the Nazi plan of violence and treachery from 1934 to 1939. The notes read, first of all, rearmament. In 1935, the introduction of compulsory military service. After that, militarization of the Rhineland. 1 year later, annexation of Austria. This greatly reinforced the Reich. The next step, Bohemia and Moravia. Then the Czech protectorate established. Thus the foundation for the conquest of Poland. Basically, I did not organize the armed forces in order not to strike. The decision to strike was always in me.
Okay, so we're going to watch that in the next lesson. Now, we talk about the arguments pro or against appeasement. We're going to look into the arguments in support of appeasement policy. Appeasement is a very interesting policy which was long debated in society, especially in British and French society. And all over Europe, even in my country, Romania, we've had heaps of discussions about this policy, and the big powers, the Western powers like France or Britain, they've been accused by letting down populations from Eastern Europe. And later on, they letting down these populations in hands of Stalin, according to Yalta Conference and Potsdam Conference. Large debates, heaps of arguments pro and against. Let's look into the arguments supporting the appeasement. So, first of all, Britain had reduced her armed forces after the First World War and was too weak to fight Germany. That's a fact. It was best to appease Germany. Sometimes it's not the worst thing to kind of seed some initiative and just try to please the enemy in order to gain the maximum you can do for your country. So they wanted to appease Germany until their armed forces will be built up again and running. Chamberlain, which was a very interesting character, controversial and a little bit of kind of like big talker, but not doing too many good things. He was doing this. France was in the same position. French people were petrified that the war will start again and they will be conquered by Germany, which actually happened. Britain and France were afraid of communism, so that will be another very important argument in supporting the appeasement. And communism spreading across Europe. Again, boys, communism was kind of the aim of communism would be to spread the communist revolution all over the world. And the Comintern, the Communist International, will actually have this target. Of course, Britain and France, they saw Hitler as a strong man, which he was, and he will be their buffer zone, the buffer zone between communism and their countries. So it's good to actually have someone to protect you in front of you, so close to your borders. Their understanding was like that Stalin will eventually attack or do something against Hitler, and Hitler will have to deal with that, not France and then Britain. Most people could still remember the terrible things that happened in World War I, and so they would try to avoid war with any price. So it doesn't matter if this appeasement looked cowardly and not very nice, but in order to prevent any other war, there was much better. I remember what Neville Chamberlain said about the Munich Agreement in a radio broadcast in 1938. He said, "I believe that this is a peace for our time, a peace with honor." And obviously, immediately in Great Britain, the Daily Express commented on comments on the Munich Agreement. People of Britain, your children are safe. Your husband and your sons will not march to war. Peace is a victory for all mankind. Obviously, big dreamers, these people. And immediately after this, conservative guy, Winston Churchill, speaking in the House of Commons, comments about this, he said, "We have suffered a total and unmitigated defeat. You will find that in a period of time, Czechoslovakia will be engulfed in the Nazi regime." Obviously, discussing about the same policy of appeasement and the Munich Conference, which was involving Czechoslovakia, Hitler was speaking in private about the Munich Agreement. He said literally that senile old rascal Chamberlain has ruined my entry into Prague, which was the capital of Czechoslovakia. So that was his opinion about the guy who was preferring the appeasement. Very interesting opinions. And so, but they were done in the hope to avoid another war, all these appeasement actions. And some people felt that Germany has been unfairly treated, as I said in the beginning, and punished in the Treaty of Versailles. So these will be the arguments in support of appeasement. Of course, really interesting to see how their heaps of actions can be justified. Doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the angle from which you look into this justification. So arguments against the appeasement, this will be in the camp of people believing that appeasement was wrong. Look at that, appeasement made Hitler feel he could get away with anything. So that was really a good point. Hitler was on riding on a big white horse, like some kind of like an image, like a Napoleonic image. Every time Britain and France failed to stand up to him, he was encouraged to make more demands, and it's exactly what happened. And Hitler was quite interesting character, starting very timidly and then just doing planning, taking all the steps towards his final target, one after the other. A very aggressive commander-in-chief for Germany. When the Russians saw Britain and France appeasing Germany, they were afraid that no one would come to their help. So the Russians were really scared that everyone will be against them. And in case of Germany will invade them, which happened later on with Operation Barbarossa, this encouraged them to reach an agreement with Germany. That was one of the reasons why we had the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which was really one big reason why the war started. The Nazi-Soviet Pact was a really important reason for the starting of the war. Britain and France were fooled by Hitler, and I fully agree with that. He played them very nicely. He played them very well. He didn't mean it when he promised that his latest conquest will be the last. The all time he will say the same thing. By the time they realized that, it was almost too late. Lucky for the Europeans that the Americans get involved. Of course, they get involved after Pearl Harbor, after they've been attacked physically. And so there was no other escape, so they needed to actually enter the war, because I cannot see how the Europeans will actually defeat Hitler. And Hitler would have done probably one of the greatest empire in the middle of Europe. The entire Europe will be a Nazi Europe. So these are the arguments against the appeasement. Very interesting policy, and you have to look into this properly, because there are questions in the exam. I cannot see any reason why you won't have a question about the appeasement. The most important question here is, was the policy of appeasement justified? And of course, when you look into that, you look in 4 different directions. So the first of all, appeasement will correct some of the injustices of Treaty of Versailles. Obviously, the appeasement will have a big say in the increasing militarism of Japan in Italy. It will be a popular policy. That's another very interesting point. And it will deal with the threat of communism. So heaps of interesting points regarding appeasement. Revision points, boys, about Czechoslovakia, very important, because this is actually the timeline of the events. After losing the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia began to descend in anarchy. Slovakia, which is the eastern part, began to demand independence, obviously, which is actually the case right now. Czech Republic is separated, Slovakia is another country. Of course, the same root, the same origin, the same people, but separated. And also in the Far East, close to Slovakia, was the Rutenia region. Hitler persuaded the Czech president to allow German troops in to restore order. You've seen the Czech president Haka, very, very backward. He didn't have any choice. He lost his country. In May 1939, Germany signed the Pact of Steel. If you remember, we talked about that with Italy. They promised to support each other if the war was declared. Obviously, Britain and France did nothing because that was their understanding of appeasement. It was absolutely clear that the appeasement policy had failed because Hitler had broken his promises and he started to acquire non-German land. If Sudetenland was German land, Moravia and Bohemia will not be a traditional German land. So that was the first time when he actually took some other lands. Okay. Once the Nazis has taken the rest of Czechoslovakia, Britain abandoned appeasement, and they made an agreement with Poland to support it in case it was invaded. Again, very difficult to trust Britain and France leaders at that point, because there were only empty words. They actually did not support Poland. They just said that because Poland was actually destroyed by Germany and Russia, and they did nothing. They just declared war, and that was it. The Poland fate was sealed.